Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and today I'm going to talk about nuanced reception in traditional astrology. This is part of my Nuanced series. Previously, I've done videos on essential dignity and accidental dignity, which you can see in my video list on my channel. Basically, we're doing the Nuance series because there's different areas that we're delving into in great depth. They have an incredible complexity and precision that they bring to medieval Renaissance astrology. And this is necessary because medieval Renaissance astrology aspires to do accurate prediction. If you want to do accurate prediction, you need to be an accurate model of reality. And let's face it, reality is very complicated, so you need a complex model with lots of precision. And so this is really one of the glories of medieval Renaissance astrology. Now, one of the things that people are going to assume, and I want you to kind of hold that thought, is that we're talking about mutual reception. Okay? Reception equals mutual reception is what everybody thinks. Whoa, hold on a second. Traditional reception is very different from mutual reception. Okay, so just keep that in mind. We're going to be wandering off and talking about what seems like off topic if you're thinking about mutual reception, but no, this is traditional reception. And traditional reception really has a lot to do with aspects. Okay, aspects are very interesting, very key part of both modern and traditional astrology. Aspect comes from the Latin aspectus, which means to see. So essentially what we're dealing with, particularly in traditional astrology, is seeing by planets, okay? In traditional astrology, only the planets make aspects. Only the planets are active, okay? They're the ones who are actually seeing, and they can see stuff that's a certain distance away. So when you're talking about making an aspect, what you're saying is that the significators are a particular distance away from each other. Each aspect has a different distance, okay? Now in Hellenistic astrology, primarily we're talking about sign to sign, okay? In medieval Renaissance, the further you go forward, we're talking about more and more degree aspects. Okay, so what's the difference? Okay, so for example, sextile in Hellenistic astrology is 2 signs away. Okay, by degree it's 60 degrees away. Okay, so when you have a degree of a sign to sign aspect, you're either in aspect or not in aspect. So if you have a planet in Aries and then another planet in Gemini, they're in sextile no matter where they are. If they're not in the right signs, then there's no aspect. And that carries on in what we call out of sign aspects, even if we're doing it by degree. Okay, that's a continuation of that whole sign to sign aspect thing. Now, aspects by degree, they're a certain distance away in zodiacal longitude, and it doesn't depend on the sign necessarily. Okay, so again, that can come into it, but the primary logic of it is that they're a specific distance away. And so, for example, sextile is 60 degrees. Square is 90 degrees, trine is 120 degrees, and an opposition is 180 degrees. And then a conjunction, what's not technically an aspect, is for the most part treated like one. They're in the same degree. So what this means is that we have a period where the planets are in what's called orb, which they're having influence over each other. They're coming up to that aspect or leaving that aspect. They have this zone of influence called an orb. And that they can either be applying or coming together to the aspect or separating from the aspect. So as you can see, way more complicated, lots more information included in that degree sign than in the sign to sign aspects. Okay, and so the key difference there, I think, is the difference between separating and applying. Okay, so typically, and this is mostly in a horary or lectional context, an applying aspect is going to show us something that's currently happening or is going to happen in the future, or that's it's effective. Separating is going to show something that happened in the past or is ineffective, it's not going to happen. Okay, these are sort of overgeneralizations, but that's essentially what we're going to look at, and that's very useful information right off the bat. Since we also have aspects by degree, we can have all sorts of other interesting, confusing nuances. For example, one planet's retrograde, moving backwards, the other planet's moving forward. It's called mutual application. That type of aspect has its own meaning. It's supposed to show things that are, basically it's not a good aspect. It shows things that are going to happen quickly or quick change. You know, again, some nuance over a regular aspect. You also have things like translation or collection of light. Lots of very interesting complex interactions that are only made possible because you have degree to degree aspects. So, you know, my view is that if we're talking about essential dignity, that tends to show the fundamental strength or weakness of a significator or the personal situation, whereas aspects show the interaction of the significators. Okay, like I said, past is shown by separating, current and future by applying. Other thing you can get out of it is the distance away. You can also sometimes use that for timing. That's pretty tricky. I have a difficult time doing that. I mean, is it days, weeks, or months, years? That's complicated. Often the degrees apart won't necessarily accurately show the timing, even if you can figure out the right time units. If I ever get the timing right, it happens occasionally, I always give myself a high five. So it's not something we can count on 100%. Whereas the applying and separating is much more consistent and accurate. So in addition to the applying and separating and the distance from perfection, you also have the nature of each aspect. And the nature of each aspect gives you very crucial information. It's showing you the nature of the interaction. So the aspects I said show interaction, show contact between significators, and the type of aspect that you're making is going to show the nature of that interaction. So for example, sextile is a positive aspect, but not the most positive aspect. The English astrologer William Lilly says it shows imperfect amity. A trine is the most positive aspect. A square is a negative aspect, but it's not the most negative aspect. And then an opposition is the most negative aspect. Conjunction depends on the situation, the dignity and debility of the significators and other factors that come into play. So it can be either positive or negative. Okay, so combining those two, essential dignity and aspect, gives us a tremendous amount of information, particularly in a horary situation. So for example, if you had the horary question, will my friend give me the loan? Okay, you'd be looking at the first house for the querent, because that's always used for that first house and first ruler to signify the querent, and then friends are 11th house, so the 11th house ruler, and then potentially planets in the 11th house. But our main focus is going to be on the house rulers. So if you had the 11th ruler dignified by sign, it's highly dignified, applying, which is an effective aspect, and a trine to the first ruler. Trine is positive, the most positive aspect. And what you've got is a situation where you've got a friend who is able, possibly rich, willing to make you the loan, and then making positive current or future contact with you. So that's pretty much of a yes. That's got pretty much all yes for that. Then another example would be if you had the 11th ruler dignified by sign and separating from a trine. Okay, it's good that the 11th ruler is strong. It's good that they're making a trine aspect, but it's separating, so that's past. So maybe they gave you money in the past, but they're not going to give it to you in the future. That separating aspect throws a real wrench into things. And my tendency would be that's probably, if that's all the information we've got, that's the only interaction, it would probably be that's more of a negative. It could be a yes, but more likely that's going to be a no answer, just because that's happening. You're wanting it in the future, right? Or the present, not in the past. That's not very helpful for you. So another example would be the 11th ruler dignified by sign applies to square the first ruler. Okay, so you've got someone who's rich or willing to help, but then you've got negative contact. Okay, and maybe even an argument. Anytime you got a square, you're always going to have to face the risk that you're not going to, that's a negative answer. So at the best, you're going to have a lot of hassle to work through to get that loan. You have to put up with a lot of effort and make a lot of spend a lot of time and energy getting it. But you also have to figure that maybe you're not going to get it at all because of that square aspect. Okay, so then let's give another example. 11th ruler in detriment applies to sextile the first ruler. Okay, so you've got positive contact with a friend, but the friend is, it's like I said, 11th ruler is in detriment, so that they're poor, unable to help you, sick, something like that. For some reason they're blocked or not able to help you or not willing to help you. So but the sextile seems like a positive. So I would say that's probably a situation where they're unable to help you. Okay, so nice to talk to them, but they're really not able to do anything for you. Okay, so finally 11th ruler in fall applies to oppose the first ruler. Okay, so then you got a situation where the friend is poor, unable to help you, and then you have a negative contact. So that could be, again, a situation where they don't want to help you. You know, either way, that's almost surely a no with all the negative factors coming into it. So you can see how the nuance blends together there with a combination of essential, dignity, and aspects. So then when we talk about traditional reception, what we're going to talk about is modifying those aspects. So what reception is, in traditional reception, is typically going to be doing is to modify the interaction. And so, as I said, that immediately the first assumption is going to be we're talking about mutual reception here, and this is not mutual reception. Okay, so I tend to refer to traditional reception, and I'm following the definition given by Guido Bonatti, who's a medieval astrologer in his Liber Astronomia. And so the requirements for traditional reception are that you have two planets and they're making an aspect. Okay, so that immediately is different from mutual reception, which has really nothing to do with aspects. Reception, traditional reception, always have to have an aspect. Okay, so the first factor is they're making an aspect. And again, that whether it's applying or separating is going to come into the picture. You don't just ignore that. And then the second factor is at least one of the planets has to be the other planet's sign or exaltation, or two lesser dignities. So term and face, term and triplicity, or face and triplicity. So only one. They don't have to both be like in mutual reception. They're both in each other's signs or exaltation, not for traditional reception. So if you have the moon in Aries applying to the sun to making an aspect, then you've got reception because you got an aspect and you also got the moon and the sun's exaltation. Okay, so great. Again, like I said, this traditional reception is very different from mutual reception. In mutual reception, the planets are in each other's signs or exaltation, or the mixed mutual reception is that one is in the other sign, the other's in the other's exaltation. Okay, it's very confusing that they have the same name, and people again get this confused all the time. I prefer the medieval astrologer Ibn Ezra's term for mutual reception, which is generosity. And that makes it clear that we're talking about something different. So my view of mutual reception was it essentially acts like an aspect. It connects the planets to one another. It's positive, and it's a connection. But again, the traditional reception, essentially what you're doing is you've got an aspect that's in existence already, and the reception comes in and makes that even easier. It makes the thing move more smoothly, and it makes it more easily. So, for example, Bonatti essentially goes through and lists lots of different possibilities as far as the different types of reception and aspects. He says if you're looking at trine with reception or sextile with reception, he says then that signifies things that come easily without striving or difficulty. He says if you've got such a positive aspect with reception, it's making things happen really easily. He says then if you have a trine without reception and a sextile with reception, then it's fairly easy, get it pretty quickly. It's not that difficult. Not as great as the trine with reception, but still it's a pretty smooth, getting pretty much what you want. Then he says striving and effort, he lists the sextile without reception or square with reception. And I sort of differentiate this. There's a tendency to say, in a sense, to simplify this and say, okay, sextile with reception equals a trine, square with reception equals sextile. I think there's even more nuances, more difficult than that. I would say a sextile without reception is still a much smoother aspect than a square with reception. The square with reception, my sense of it is that you've got difficulties, you've got problems, you've got a lot of extra effort, but there is a possibility that you can work through of it. It's not like, a sextile without reception is pretty positive, that's a yes. Square with reception is it's a maybe, it's a question mark, and it's going to require a lot of energy and effort on your part, and it could still not go through even if you make a lot of effort and try to get through it. But it's sort of like, I want to reconcile with my sister, applying square with reception, like, well, okay, it's positive insofar as the possibilities there, but you're definitely going to have to make a lot of effort and energy and work and hassle to get through that and to make it work. So then Bonatti goes on and says you've got an opposition or a square with reception, without reception. He says, square with, yes, without reception. You've got striving, efforts, obstacles, great troubles. So again, I think he probably meant opposition with reception. And then the greatest labor, obstacles, and striving, it says hardly ever or perfect or cause a positive answer is the opposition without reception. So that makes the logic of it. It's a negative aspect. Without reception, this is as bad as you can get. And the most negative aspect without reception is going to be the worst possible aspect. One of the interesting points that William Lilly makes in Christian astrology is he talks about perfection by opposition with reception. And he says, that can bring about the desired results, but he said a lot of times the querent would be better off if it hadn't happened at all. He says if you got a marriage, the spouses are just arguing and wrangling and jangling all the time. He says if it's money, you're trying to get a loan or something, it ends up costing you more in the end than you get from the loan. I call the opposition with reception the fatal attraction aspect, and I've seen it in relationships where people sort of magnetically pulled into this relationship, and then it's a disaster. So it's really interesting to see that kind of level of nuance that you're able to get from that. Now, one of the interesting things that Bonatti points out is that there are situations where reception is negated, and he says that's where one of the planets is in the other's detriment or fall, or in its own detriment or fall. So if you had a situation where, for example, that the moon is in Aries, right, and it's applying to the sun, except the sun is in Aquarius, then yeah, there's an aspect. If there is, don't come back to me because I haven't looked that up. And I'm just saying, let's just not worry about these specific aspects. So just say that that's the placement of the signs. You've got the moon is in, say, the exaltation or whatever of the sun, but the sun is itself in detriment or fall, or in, say, for example, the detriment or fall of the moon. Then that's going to negate the reception. So in fact, Bonatti says not only does it not perfect, but he says it impedes and even destroys the situation. So it's not going to be helpful if one of the other planets is in detriment, its own detriment, or the detriment of the other planet that's aspecting it. So that's traditional reception. And like I said, very useful, very interesting, adding a lot of nuance in, modifying aspects, and that's its main function. So like I said, the first confusion that we've got is between mutual reception and traditional reception. And again, you want to be careful to keep those separate. Traditional astrology does use mutual reception, but it has, like I said, a different nuance, a different meaning. Second confusion comes about from contemporary horary astrologers. This is a little more prevalent, say 15 or 20 years ago. But they, again, were assuming that we're talking about mutual reception. And then what they said was, oh, mutual reception, the planets switch signs, that they actually change their essential dignity. So Sun in Aquarius and Saturn in Leo, well, that looks bad because the Sun is in detriment, Saturn's in detriment. Presto, changeo, they switch signs, so that means, it's equivalent to both being in sign now and not both being in detriment. Everything's great. Absolutely not. No traditional support for that, either in changing signs or negating the essential dignity. In fact, as we found out, if either of them are in their own detriment or in the other's detriment, then it negates the reception. Okay, so I think though this presto changeo, everything's great, from being everything terrible, feeds into a third confusion, which is using reception as what I call a Hail Mary. Okay, what's a Hail Mary? Basically, this is a situation, and it often comes up in a reassurance reading, or people are doing their own question, they want to have a positive answer. They look at the horary chart, it's got 10 negative factors, but they see one positive, so okay, that wipes everything else out. So for example, you've got a relationship question, and horary, and the querent is their significators in detriment, it's separating from an opposition to the seventh ruler is in fall, seventh ruler is in relationships, but the part of fortune's in the seventh house, oh well, great, we'll live happily ever after. So rather than following the traditional method, which is to look at all the factors, to synthesize them, and to sort of, in a sense, each one's voting. You've got 10 votes no and 1 vote yes, that the yes is going to be outvoted in that kind of situation. But the underlying pattern there with so many negative factors really is negative. We're not going to overthrow it with one. But like I said, that Hail Mary is, okay, yeah, there's a whole lot of negative stuff, but we're saved by this one particular factor. And reception, particularly, like I said, mutual reception is often used that way. I've also seen Kazemi used that way as well. Everything's terrible, but sun is, moon's Kazemi, so whatever. It overthrows everything else. So lots of potential for confusion here. Like I said, if you can keep the distinction between traditional reception that requires an aspect and mutual reception out, then keep those clear, then you're going to be a long way to understand this. And then you can go ahead and dive into the medieval Renaissance and see how much the reception adds and how important it is to looking at the interaction of significators in the chart. So I hope you found that interesting. I think the nuance, and again, it's one of those areas where we're getting a tremendous amount of information, lots of precise and useful distinctions. And that's really what distinguishes medieval Renaissance astrology and makes it such a useful tool for prediction. So I hope you found that interesting and were able to figure out some of that complexity and dive into it. If you're serious about this, you should go ahead and take my horary astrology or lectional astrology courses, and I'm going to have links in there. That really goes into detail. And the key with this is actually doing lots of practice. So once you sort of learn the concept, that's not enough. You want to do lots and lots of charts. And actually put it into practice, and then that really is the best way to learn how to do it. And a course is really an excellent way to figure out how to do that and be guided by a teacher through all this. So again, I hope you found that useful. I found it interesting to think about it, and I'll look forward to doing more of these nuanced videos in the future.